Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Rob.
And this is Ask Rob and Rob.
Welcome to Ask Rob and Rob. Yes, it's Tuesday, and that means we are here to answer 2 of your property questions. Answers coming up in just a sec for Martin and Luke, but first, a quick reminder of how you can get your own question in.
Yeah, you can call in on 013 808 0035. That number's been around for a long time now. I'm sure you've got it saved. And I'm sure you've got this website saved as well, propertyhub.net/ask. Either way, it's super easy to get involved. Leave a message. It's a voicemail on the phone. It's similar on the computer. And if you mess up, you can try again. So you've got no excuses. And this week, we've had 2 people follow that process to a T. Let's start with Martin.
Hi guys, my name is Martin. I'm from Ireland. I've recently started listening to the podcast and I'm finding it very useful indeed, very educational as somebody who's looking to get involved in property investment over the next few years. So I just have a quick question for you guys in relation to interest-only mortgages. So I'm looking at taking out an interest-only mortgage to buy my first property, and it'll be great because I'll have more rental income coming in every month then, as opposed to taking out a capital repayment mortgage. However, one thing that I'm not too sure about is when it comes to the end of the mortgage term and I have to repay the outstanding loan, I'm wondering how I'll manage to have funds to pay for that. At present, I'm thinking that when I get my rental income gradually and it accumulates over time, I'd like to put that toward another investment. But I'm just trying to see, 20, 25 years down the line, how I would be able to repay potentially several different lump sums from these mortgages. So I'm just wondering if you guys have come across any strategies that may be useful in terms of saving up to repay these lump sums at the end of the mortgage term. Hope the question makes sense. It might sound like a silly question, but I'd really appreciate some feedback on it. Thank you.
Martin, thank you for your question. It's interesting, interest only. Oh, I didn't even mean to do that. But the reason why is a lot of people feel quite nervous around it. And actually, when people are new to buy to let, they will find it quite surprising that the vast majority of people invest through interest-only mortgages. And we've covered on the podcast why. Now, there are multiple reasons for this. The first is that your cash flow will be improved. So each month, your mortgage payments will be less, and therefore you have more cash left over. Now, this is great, particularly at the beginning when you need to build up your cash pot again and reinvest. And you could say, well, why not pay down your mortgage instead of reinvesting? Well, your mortgage rates are probably, hopefully, in this current climate, pretty low. So let's just say your mortgage rate is 2.5%. Now, if it's 2.5%, the decision becomes very simple because if I invest, will I get a better return than 2.5%? So it's looking at the two because you're putting your money into one or the other. It's paying down a mortgage at 2.5% or investing to get better than 2.5%. And when you look at the rental return plus the potential of capital growth, the answer for the vast majority of times is that it's much better to invest. And that is why property investors use interest only. The other reason that property investors use interest only is that your debt over time will be devalued by inflation. So let's just say today you bought a property on interest only, so the number stays the same, and that mortgage was £100,000. So today that might be pretty weighty to you. But in 10 years' time, it's still £100,000. But it's worth a bit less in real terms. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. And then in 20 years' time, it's worth more again. So today, £100,000 might have the purchasing power to buy you a brand new Porsche. But in 20 years' time, it will probably have the purchasing power to buy you a brand new Mondeo. And you can't buy the Porsche anymore. And that's because money has been devalued over time because of inflation. So your debt is eroded over time. But your assets that you've bought, property, is increasing over time. So inflation is devaluing your debt, but helps increase your asset value. Now, if you're hearing this concept for the first time, this can be quite a lot to take in, so don't worry, I fully expect that. So we've created a course which is titled How Property Will Make You Rich in the Long Term. It's absolutely free to access. It's on the Property Hub website. Go and look at the education section there, and you can watch that course and then really absorb this knowledge. But what you're hearing, Martin, is there are a number of reasons why interest only for property investors is far more compelling. Of course, the thought of paying down your mortgage may give you peace of mind and help you sleep at night, and that's got to be worth something as well. But when you balance it with all the plus points of going for interest only, then for me, it's pretty much a no-brainer. So if you watch that video, you'll feel a lot more comfortable about investing with interest-only mortgages.
You certainly will. And hopefully that point that Rob made, a really important point about the impact of inflation, will really land with you after watching that, because that is the key. By the time you get to 20, 25 years in the future, £100,000, if that is the borrowing you've got, is going to actually be a lot less in real terms than it is today. So if you've used that borrowing intelligently and you've built up a good size asset base that's earning money for you, then you should be able to pay that off by selling part of your portfolio, by saving up rental income and using that to pay it off, or any number of other ways. If you're taking out debt, then using that debt to go on holiday or buy cars, then yeah, one day you've got to pay that back, and how on earth are you going to do it? But if you're using it to buy assets and those assets increase in value faster than the debt does, and the debt's actually shrinking and it's generating income for you, then the prospect of repaying it is a whole lot less scary. So that course should really help you out. Okay, let's move on to another question now. This one's from Luke.
Hi, Rob and Rob. It's Luke from Hong Kong. Really love the content. It's very insightful, so thanks very much and keep up the great work. I'm just about to complete on my third buy-to-let property in the UK. And I'd be grateful to hear your thoughts around the pros and cons of having a valid tenancy agreement in place, i.e. at the end of the term, let's assume it's a standard 1-year term, should I let it roll over into periodic tenancy, or should I renew for a further fixed term? I'd be grateful to hear your thoughts. Many thanks.
Luke, good question. The first thing I would say is you said having a valid tenancy agreement in place. And it's important to note that having a periodic tenancy is every bit as valid as having a fixed term one. It's just a continuation of the same agreement. It's just that you haven't put a new fixed date on it. And for anyone who doesn't know, that is what naturally happens when you get to the end of a tenancy. So if you have a fixed term of a year, when you get to the end of that year, you can mutually agree to extend it and for another fixed period of time. Or if you don't take any action at all, by default, it just continues on a periodic basis. And that means that if the rent is paid monthly, for example, then each period is a month. And so it's effectively a month-to-month contract. And that means that the tenant can then break that agreement and leave with a month's notice. You, as the landlord, always need to give 2 months' notice, even if it's a monthly periodic tenancy. So which should you do? I would say it's purely a matter of opinion. I don't believe there is a right or wrong on this. And it partly comes down to what the tenant wants as well, because they need to agree with whichever course of action you propose. The benefit of having a fixed term, of course, is that you know that that tenant is there for that period of time, and so you don't have to worry about the property becoming empty again during that time. Offset against that is that it's much harder to evict during a fixed term rather than at the end or during a periodic tenancy. So if you want to end the tenancy a few months into a new fixed term, either because your plans have changed or because the tenant has stopped paying rent, it'll be very, very difficult for you to do so compared to if the tenancy was periodic. And for the tenant, the considerations are roughly the same. It's flexibility versus certainty. And that is just a personal decision. For me, it depends slightly on the market and the type of property. So I own some properties that are not student properties, but they do appeal to students as well as to young professionals and other people as well. So it suits me if they tend to be coming up for rent round about August, September time, because then they appeal to students as well as the rest of the market. And the market in those locations is generally stronger at that time. Therefore, I like to stick to fixed terms because then I know that the tenancy is always ending at the same time of year. I've got other properties where that's not a consideration and I just absolutely don't care. So I'll be guided by what the tenant wants. And I've had some occasions where they come to me and they say that they want to renew for a year, and that's fine. I consider that to be a good sign. But I've had others where they want to just let it go month to month because they're not sure how long they want to stay. And from my side, I want them to stay as long as they want to because they're good tenants, but I can't force them to stay longer than they want to. So I'm happy to let it go month to month. So that's all quite a long way of saying it doesn't actually matter that much unless for some reason you have a strong opinion. If you don't, and the market gives you no reason to have a strong opinion, then you can be relaxed about it. Be open-minded, and as the tenancy comes up for renewal, ask the tenant what they want. And you know that whatever it is that they propose, that'll be fine with you.
So that's us done for another week. Thank you for listening. We'll be back on Thursday with the Property Podcast. And of course, we'll be back next week with Ask Rob and Rob. So until then, take care, everyone. Have fun. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.